Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I have a question that I love to start with that's actually kind of around my guest's podcast. And it's more of a rhetorical question, but it's kind of a fun question. And the question is, how did you acquire your first customer? And I was like, man, I couldn't even think back that far. So I was like, I don't know, maybe more recent. So I'm like, I got to check who this guy out is. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Jay Aigner. How are you today, sir?
Good, Dave. How are you, buddy? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So your podcast is called The First Customer, and you are CEO of a company called JDAQA LLC. So there's a lot there. So why don't you fill us in on what JDAQA means and what you got going on over there?
So JDAQA is a very unimaginative name for my quality assurance company. It's just my initials, which is JDA, and then QA for quality assurance.
Huh?
Uh, actually, that customer, I was running up and down the stairs, like trying to ask my wife, like, I just got to put a name on this. This is like my first, like, what do I, she's like, what about your initials? And like, I'm like, so anyway, that's where the company name came from. And we do software quality assurance, software testing, for custom software development shops and SaaS companies. So, a lot of times, companies building digital products just want to build cool stuff and don't want
Sure.
to worry about all the browsers and devices and how do we test it and how do we make sure it doesn't blow up if 10,000 people log on at the same time.
Sure.
And that's where they bring us in.
Okay. So how in the world did you get from, that to thinking of you want to do a podcast called The First Customer? How in the world did that transition happen?
Um, well, my good friend Russ McCumber, who owns a company called Impressive Marketing, um, told me I should do a podcast one day.
Okay.
I had like standing meetings with a bunch of like successful business owner friends of mine. Just like somebody said I should do that, and I did it, and I love it. And it's been some of my best inspiration I've gotten. But um, he said you should do a podcast, and I said that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I would never do a podcast. It's stupid. I don't have anything to talk about. Um, but I planted a seed, and I just I was gonna do one with my friend about his business. We were gonna do it together. Is like this
Sure.
kind of, and then he bailed out. And I was like, you know what? I've put enough thought into this that maybe I could make something of it. I just had a list of questions I kept kind of iterating on. And I asked a bunch of my friends who own businesses if they'd be interested in telling me the story of their first customer.
Sure.
And had 10 or 15 say yes. And now we've got, 100 plus in the bank. So it's been good,
Wow.
man.
That's awesome. Do you see any type of common thread through that, Jay? Of through now you're 100 and some in, what are some things that you're hearing that's kind of common, things maybe that people listening could, gain knowledge from on how to not necessarily gain their first customer, but how to expand a market, how to find a market that they weren't in. I just didn't know if you had anything that you see keep coming up on that.
A great question. For the people who don't have a business and they're starting one, the most common thread is the friends and family plan, like I like to call it, where it's like if you have an idea or a service or whatever, like it may be uncomfortable and you may feel like you're being annoying, but as long as you're not in like part of a pyramid scheme or something, like you can reach out to your friends and family and genuinely try to help them with some problem you think they may have.
Sure.
And that's where a lot of people's first customers come from. It's just like somebody they
Okay.
know, some previous client, a previous coworker, a family
Sure.
member, somebody who needs what they're selling. And then as far as expanding into new business for kind of existing business owners, it's really, um, I say this all the time. You can be successful and run a business and make money and not know who your customer is.
Sure.
You can just sell stuff and people can buy it. And it's like this. But once you take the time to really identify who that person is, then you can really start to take off. So it's really about, gathering the data, who's buying your services, who's using it, is there some new exciting vertical that you could hit based off of all the feedback you get from your existing kind of customers? And then you go after it and you got to identify who that is very clearly, where they work, who they are, what they look like, what they do every day,
Sure. Yep.
and attack those pain points. And you can pretty easily find yourself, pretty successful uh, in some new line of business.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I think this is a big blind spot though, Jay, because I'm guessing a lot of people listening feel like they have a really good idea of what their customer is like, but in reality, they could be pretty far off. So, I mean, I always am an advocate of like talking to your customer and asking them what they want, how we can improve, what are other people crushing it on? I'm just curious with these people that you're talking to is customer acquisition, high on everybody's list generally, or do you see it more like an interruption in their day at times? Because I kind of see both camps, and I'm just curious what you're seeing on your end.
Yeah, I think it totally depends on where they are in their life cycle and what type of business they have. I mean, if it's a product business, it's completely separate than like a service-based business. Somebody said it the other day, and I never really thought of it, but they said, a product-based business is this thing that you're kind of slowly trying to accumulate new customers, and you're working on the product itself, and you're not really chasing customers. But in a service-based business, you're always looking for the next client. You're always like looking for the, and it's like that kind of resonated with me where like I have a service-based business. So yeah, I think that kind of rings true with everybody, right? I've never really I've met very few business owners who are like, I'm good with where I am. Like I'm good. Like I'm just too busy to get new customers. Like that's a very rare personality trait.
Well, and I think it's kind of the difference between retail and, I mean, I was in retail when I was a kid, and, we'd be in the mall, and at 10 o'clock, the mall would open, and then you'd open up your storefront inside the mall, and you would stand there, and let's face it, January and February up in Milwaukee, not a lot of people are at the mall at 10 a.m. in the morning, right? So you're just kind of standing there waiting for people, entrepreneurs generally can't stand and wait for anybody. There are certain people that will, just stand there and wait, and they're like, okay, I guess if they want to come, they'll show up. I mean, it's that, to me, I call it that retail mentality. And I'm just curious, on your end, your journey, Jay, how did you start your entrepreneurial journey?
I applied for Uber because my wife was an overnight nurse. I tell this story a lot, but I did software testing during the day as a 9-to-5 job, and then she was an overnight nurse, and I wanted to get her out of there, and I was trying anything I could come up with to kind of supplement that income. Applied for Uber. My license was from Virginia, and I lived in Pennsylvania at the time, so like they wouldn't let me drive for Uber, which is probably the greatest turn down I've ever had. And then went online to look for contract stuff and found Upwork. So I got started in Upwork, man. It was a very great place to start a business. It's a little tougher these days. Now they've gone public, and it's a bit of there's a lot of people on there. But I started by doing freelancing, and just kind of snowballed that into having too many contracts and started hiring people that I used to work with. My old boss, I brought in to work with me for a couple of different projects. So yeah, it was basically from freelancing, which is why I think today I'm very much a consulting evangelist.
Yep. And I'm curious, because we have a bunch of people listening, Jay, that are like super envious of us. We own our own business. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. They just think the grass is greener. I'm envious of the cart boy at Walmart at times, because all he has to do is push a button and all these carts move, and not a lot of stress there. But from your perspective, did you start? So it sounded like you had a day job, I'm going to call it. You worked in corporate America, and then you had a side hustle. Did that side hustle eventually grow so much that you had to quit that 9-to-5 job? Is that kind of how your journey was?
Not exactly. I got let go of a place that I was working at, where I built the business on the side as I was doing my full-time job there for a few years. And then I was running the business. I have 5 kids, so like it's a big jump to go from like, stable paycheck, which by the way is the biggest myth in the world, like stable paycheck, healthcare benefits, all that stuff, from like a 9-to-5 job. Like that is an excuse. Using that as an excuse not to start your own business, I think, is one of the biggest misnomers in starting a business in America. But yeah, so I did it for about 2 or 3 months, and then I got hired somewhere else as a senior executive at a fintech company, which I worked at for about 1.5 years. I still kind of did the business on the side. And then we amicably kind of split ways about 1.5 years later. And so I'd kind of built this thing up to about $1 million a year, just having kind of a good infrastructure in place and people doing their things while working another job.
Okay.
And then after I left that fintech job, which was, I guess, back in 2019, maybe,
Yeah.
or maybe, yeah, something like that, 2020, somewhere in there. I decided I'm going to do it full time. I'm going to do it full time and could never go back. And I definitely don't think I could ever go back now.
You
It's just,
drank the
yeah.
juice.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, to answer in a very long-winded way, I did it on the side for a long time,
Sure.
and then had the stability of a full-time job, and a de-risked business for the most part, which was paid. My guys were paid by my customers, and margin was in between. That's what we
Yep.
kept. So,
Sure.
and that's how we kind of continue to run the business today.
That's awesome. And we always make sure and note that there's no right or wrong way to start your own business. Some people quit one day and start up the next day with something with, complete leap of faith. Other people, do a side hustle like Jay's doing, like he did for a while. There's no right or wrong way. I think the cool part is getting out of your comfort zone and finding that growth zone, because that's really where the magic happens. And so I love the fact that you made that jump, and you can say, man, I couldn't imagine going back. I rarely run into somebody that is like, man, I made the jump and I can't wait to get back to corporate America.
Yeah, I don't know many of those people. I know a couple, but not many.
Yeah. So you got to help me understand something. So your work back then, you had a full-time job, you were running a $1 million business on the side, and then you had a family. How did you how did you do a work-life balance? What were some time management things? I mean, how did you do that? Because I'm sure a bunch of people are like, dude, how did you do that? I can't do it with one of those three. So I'm just curious, how did you do that with all that?
I'd love to say that it was some masterful time management,
Give
and
us
then
the silver bullet right now. That's what
I
we'd
have a
love.
3-step strategy. Here we go. Here we'll fit. No, I don't have that. I think it was just, I don't know. I'm a little more laid back. I grew up in Virginia in the middle of nowhere, so it's just like a little bit slower pace out there. And then I kind of got injected into the real world when I was, an adult. Um, yeah, I don't. I think it's the ability to just let stuff roll off your back, right? I mean, the reason why people can't handle that is because of stress, and stress is because things are eating at you, or like you worry about stuff too much, or all these
Yeah.
different things. And I didn't really I just made it work. I didn't worry about what yeah, everything's stressful every now and again, of course. Like, I'm not some magic person, but yeah. And then when I got to running things a little more efficiently, I started to block off time on my calendar.
Mm-hmm.
So an hour at a time, just kind of dedicated to a couple tasks. But I try to stick to that. I try to stick to my to-do list. But it's really just whatever works at the time. And it's really kind of, if I can make sure my family life, which is wild with a bunch of kids and all that stuff, is good,
Sure.
then the rest of it's kind of easy. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, I've done it reverse, like the family first, and then back that into any jobs that I have.
Well, and generally speaking, Jay, entrepreneurs listening, they don't want to admit it out loud, but their lifestyle is such that the company's first, the business is first. They're a slave to it. They don't know how to break free from it. So it's awesome to hear somebody that actually did the family first and kind of flipped that around. So I appreciate you sharing that. You also talked about worry and stress, and we know that worry and stress, it really uses a lot of energy. So, how do you I don't know if you have any tips for anybody listening. How did you kind of, turn that stress and turn that worry into using it towards your business? I am just curious if anything comes to mind in that situation for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think um worrying about the things that I could control. Anytime that I've tried to focus on things that I can't control, you just spiral and
Sure.
you get, so I think just trying to just knowing that other side, which is spiraling into like worry and anxiety and all that stuff. I think just knowing that's over there, I've kind of just used that to drive my focus towards like all right, if I'm, spinning up an LLC, which I did recently, right? Like I have to be, there's a bunch of things I have to do. And if
Mhm.
I go through and do all those things, at the end of the 3 days that I'm doing these things, I will have an LLC, it'll have an EIN number, we'll have Google Workplace set up, we'll be able to spin this business up and start running another service agency. Um, and while that was happening, like I've got an 18-year-old that's about to go off to the Air Force, and we've got like, a bunch of little kids, and we've got a baby, and we've got
Yeah.
hockey and travel and all this stuff. Um, so I think just knowing that that stuff is over there and compartmentalizing it in a way that like you got to focus on. I mean, my oldest son and his girlfriend just broke up, and I'm like, the only way to get through this is to just focus on things that keep you busy and the things that are going to provide value to you, right? So
Yeah.
like the same thing I would tell business owners, like if you've got all this anxiety and stress and worrying or whatever, just work. Sit
Yeah.
down, put pen to paper about the list of things you have to do and work through your list. Like there's really no magic to it.
Well, it's funny because when you have all these things going on and then you say, I just flipped a bit, I started another business. You just flip that in there. So when we come back, I want to kind of unpack that with you. So
Sure.
we'll be right back after this message. Awesome. Well, so I don't know if you meant to do that, but you kind of put it in there and then you just went on. So are you a serial business starter? Is that something that you like to do? I mean, is that needed for some other businesses? People are intrigued by what you just said because some people have been in the same business for 30 years, never even considered what you just said. And you said, oh, in 3 days, I got an EIN number, I got a Google Workplace, I got my LLC set up, and we're ready to roll. Um, Unpack that for us. How does that work for you? Is that something that just comes natural?
I mean, it's not, it's like a lot of things I think in life that are like, they seem way more complicated and daunting than they are. Um, Spinning up an LLC and creating a new business these days is all online. It takes it's whatever, a couple $100. Like you get a notary, you get a virtual address, you get all these things set up, and you're off and running. This one is for a line of business that we've had inquiries about for a long time through my company, JDAQA, but all we do is software testing. And like that laser focus, like on that part of the software development lifecycle has served us very well. And it's a selling point for us, right? Like people go, oh, that's all you do, then you must be experts in it, right? So it's like it
Sure.
is the very much the typical like niche into something and just go after it. But there's also an adjacent piece to that, which is DevOps, which is like development operations, pushing code from the developer's machine to quality assurance and then out to production, right? So it's like, how do the developers get their code that they're writing when they're creating these products out into people's hands?
Okay.
And so a friend of mine has been working in that capacity at JDAQA. We're doing stuff every now and again when people ask for it. But there was enough demand where we said, let's just spin up a separate company. I've always wanted to be a serial, company starter, and like this was
Sure.
the perfect opportunity. So yeah, it's in its infancy, but we already have a couple clients lined up, and I think we can do pretty well. It's just another tech services company that will hopefully deliver value to companies who need it.
Sure. Wow, that's so cool. And an old school, I'll call it, an old school entrepreneur, Jay, is going to be one of those that's going to want to have his hands in everything or her hands in everything, control everything, wear all the hats, and just be like impossible to delegate. I can do it the best. Nobody can do it as good as me. Do you suffer from any of those from your standpoint, or is it pretty easy for you to delegate and hand that stuff off as you're building these other businesses?
Um, it's very easy if you trust the people that you've put in place.
Okay.
So JDAQA, I have a legendary team, just incredible. My operations layer there is just fantastic, and that allows me to focus on sales and biz dev stuff. This new business, I will probably be in a similar role. I won't be doing the technical side of things, but I think I like the word evangelist. I'm a delegation evangelist too. Like everybody should delegate. Like I think that's the number one problem all the businesses I talk to, and the burnout, uh, burnout business owners are because they don't delegate. So
Sure.
yeah, I think I just got really fortunate early in my career and early in my business that I had some people that I could really trust. I handed stuff off. It worked. I mean, there's always problems, with everything that you do. But if somebody's doing something 80%, 90%, or even 110% better than you would be doing it, I think it's foolish not to hand it off, right? So I'm a big proponent of buying your time back
Yeah.
and handing off, anything and everything I can.
Well, and but that does take a level of maturity, because I'm sure there's people listening that say, "Hey, you don't understand. I can do it better than anybody."
I don't doubt it.
Might be a
I don't
blind
doubt it.
spot for them, and maybe they can, maybe they can't. But like you said, how do you scale that? I mean, you can't write out every invoice, you can't program everything, whatever your skill, craft, trade company is doing, you can't do it all. So it's funny how some people, they're okay having an attorney, a CPA, they're okay with those types of offices, we'll call them. But boy, when you get in the office, they're sweeping the floor, or they're out, cutting the grass. I mean, and if that's what you love to do and you want to do it and it's your company, more power to you, right? I just think that there's people that they feel like almost stuck there. And I was just curious, as a delegation evangelist, have you struggled with it, or was it pretty easy from the beginning for you to delegate everything?
It's hard to remember when I started to delegate things, but I think I had to get over it quickly
Yeah.
because I run a tech services business, and like you pointed out, there's only one me, and if I was doing the QA for a project, then I knew it was getting done right and all these different things. But as soon as I decided to have a business and like bring in somebody else, that was where I had to kind of make the decision. Like either you're going to hand stuff off and you're going to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm doing I mean, the biggest part too is like I have to do my job when I hand it off. Like if something, it's never anybody else's fault in a business, right? Like it's not
Right.
anybody's fault if it's the wrong person, if that person doesn't show up, or if there's some flaw somewhere in the process that I did not think of and I
Yep.
didn't execute properly, and I put the wrong person in the wrong place. And so I learned that early on that like that does happen. But like the upside is that 95% of your time is spent doing things to grow the business as opposed to working in the business.
Yeah.
So is that 5 to 10% of uh, damage control and things you have to fix, is that worth 90% being out there and selling your stuff? Absolutely, at least to me it is.
Is business growth your favorite part of the business?
Yeah, I think so. I've never really thought of it that way, but yeah, I think so. The things associated with it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all new things all the time.
Yeah.
You're always learning, man. There's always new ways to try things. You feel stuck, you figure out how
Sure.
to get unstuck. Um, yeah, I think the growth part is, and getting new clients is super exciting still to this day. It's
Yeah.
always super exciting. You can go tell your wife or your loved ones like, "Hey, we got another one today," and they're like,
Yeah.
"Good job." It doesn't quite mean as much to them, I think, as it does to me, but you can still be excited, and your team
Yeah.
is happy and proud, and so it's yeah, I think just being there, business growth, and then something over the years that I never really set out to do was like being a champion for my employees, and like we have a lot of people in the Philippines, and I think they probably get mistreated by a bunch of contracting US based companies. And like I really do try to go the extra mile and like really like kind of protect them. Like if there's things they need from me, if they're medical stuff or they're off or whatever. Like I just I never that didn't set out that to be my goal, but like I realized that was part of my job was to like protect my guys, build them up, teach them stuff, make them better off here at my company and anywhere else they want to go. So I think growth for the business and then growth for our employees is kind of really important to me.
Wow, that's great. And I think that's an interesting point that you brought up there, is protecting your team. We're so used to thinking about our team, just the group of people that are in our office, or just the group of people that are on our payroll. And we kind of sometimes forget about the 1099s or the virtual assistants or whatever network of people that you have listening. Just, I think that's really wise advice to protect them like you would protect somebody on your team in your office, quite frankly, sitting next to you.
Yeah.
It's really easy. We early on, we had a VA doing our podcast before Dana's doing it for us. And she was in the Philippines, and it was really hard because there was such a time difference. Right. And so
Yep.
I'm working during the day and she's sleeping. So then she tried being awake. I mean, that's got to be hard. Do you guys communicate a lot with your team? Or how do you work through that chunk?
Yeah. I mean, we certainly have, um, we have had to figure that out. And a lot of the tech folks in the Philippines are used to working those later shifts and sometimes even overnight, because a lot of those corporate, like, I didn't know that they had like colleges. Like, for example, Accenture has a college in the Philippines. And if you
Okay.
graduate high school, you can go to Accenture College and like they line you up to work with Microsoft. But guess what? Microsoft's in California, right? So like that's where, and so a lot of it's just natural. They prefer to work that kind of time zone because that's what they've been doing for the last 10 years of their life.
Sure.
If there's opportunities and if they want to work different time zones to make it easier for them, like we have a couple shifts of people, obviously, like our VAs, we have 3 or 4 people that work with us, and then they're somewhere in the morning, somewhere in the afternoon, somewhere whatever, just we have full coverage. And the same thing for QA. And luckily for us, a lot of companies also use offshore dev resources. So if we're working with their devs that are in, I don't know, Eastern or Europe or Western Europe or anywhere around the world.
Sure.
Sometimes it's easier for those two time zones to connect than United States. But all our people work in Eastern Standard Time Zone if needed for the most part. So yeah, it's something we've kind of figured out over the years.
Well, and I think it's just so creative to, like you said, figure it out. I mean, it's real easy in today's world to raise my hands and say, I don't know, blame the government, blame somebody else, right? Blame the competitor, the customer. We could do this if there wasn't a time zone difference. I mean, there's always something to blame. And I
Yep.
think the best entrepreneurs just work with what they have. And
Yeah.
that's what I heard. That's what I love about that. As we start to land the plane, I'm just curious from your perspective, what would your tip of the day be for somebody listening that is contemplating starting a business? You're in that space. You can start them up at will. That might be a superpower that you have. So I'm just curious for somebody listening right now that has an idea, but they are just stuck. What's your advice to help them get unstuck?
I think it's a very common problem. Um, I think, it's very easy to get stuck, and the way to get unstuck, depending on where you are in your journey, um, is to try to get your first customer. Like that should be your goal. Nothing else. Like all the stuff about spinning up LLCs and what, like, don't, none of that stuff matters. Like the
Yeah,
only thing that matters is that the idea you have, and if that's a product, then you better go out and start doing market research and, like, asking people and surveying people. And like, you can't just go build something and then like hope people are going to use it, because that's like the number one, I would guess, death signal for product based businesses, especially where you're like, I have this great idea and I'm going to go build this thing and everybody's going to love it, and then you do all
yeah,
this work and spend all this money and then nobody loves it, and you're just like, well, why didn't so I think if it's a product based business, um doing your homework, going out and talking to people in your space. If you're going to work with, if you're making a product for insurance companies, go to insurance conventions. If you're doing it for, I don't know, first responders, go to your, closest 5, firehouses and see. I mean, you just got to figure out like who is going to use this thing. Is it a good idea?
right.
If it's a service based business, which is way easier in my opinion, and you have some value to add to businesses or to people, just go do it.
Yeah,
Reach out to your top 50 or 100 connections, phone, email, LinkedIn, text message, whatever, and just say, hey, I started to do landscaping. Do you or anybody else, are interested in that, here, happy to give you an introductory price to get you in the door. So
Sure.
I would just say going out and doing it if you're a service-based business is probably the best tip.
That's great. Well, I tell you, Kevin Costner blew it for us with Field of Dreams when he said, "Build it and they will come."
Yes, he did.
Because
No, they will
many
not.
many a company has, like you said, invested, and it's just crazy. They put their shingle out, and they open their doors, and they didn't have any grand opening media coverage, didn't do anything on social media, didn't do anything, just figured that people were just going to magically show up. And when it doesn't happen, boy, people are like devastated.
I mean, as they should be. It's a big time investment and stuff.
Yeah,
It's like you're just missing the most important piece, which is like who is going to pay you for whatever it is you're trying to provide. And like if you don't know that, then
right.
you're getting set up to get your feelings hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote my book called Growing on Purpose, and we talked about improving the customer's experience, and that was a big thing. And I see so many people take the customer for granted. So I love the fact that you are asking that question of how did you acquire your first customer, and having a podcast built around that. So the name of the podcast is The First Customer. So you find it on wherever you listen to this broadcast right here.
Yep.
Again, if you want to tap in to listen to those, I saw some cool names of, I haven't had a chance to listen. I was just doing research for today, and I was like, wow, there's some cool names. There's some cool stories that are in there. So definitely, check that out. And I'm going to let you go after this. If somebody wants to learn more about you, Jay, if they want to learn more about JDAQA, or they are maybe have a entrepreneur question, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I'm going to do my favorite guest trick here and pause and say, thank you, Dave, for having me. I hope everybody gives you a 5-star review. I love this when people do this to me, so I'm going to reciprocate.
Thank you.
I do love the show. I think people should check it out. I listened to a few episodes before I came on, so give Dave 5 stars. If you want to reach me, Jay Aigner on LinkedIn, AIGNER. Probably the easiest way, jay@jdaqa.com as well. And check out the website for JDAQA at jdaqa.com.
Awesome. That is so cool. So again, for anyone listening, it's so easy to jump into our next activity. It's so easy to just hit the end button and go do something else. I'm guessing that something resonated with you today. Something struck a chord. Maybe there's something down deep that you have this idea that you want to, run past your buddy or talk to somebody, a business coach. I'd be happy to help, ask Jay, but we're just here to be able to help you because it's so cool watching businesses, mine years ago, I started at $0 and sold it when we were at 10 million in annual sales. And it's just such a cool journey. And then to go and do it again and teach others how to do it. Everybody listening today has a different spot that they're supposed to be. So just be the best one that you can in what you're doing. And anytime you think that you can't do it, think of what we just heard, where a guy can spin a new company in 3 days. And, there's a lot there. And again, I'd love to continue to watch this and see how this goes. So thank you again for jumping on, and thanks for all that you're doing. And it's just fun to watch entrepreneurs that do it naturally, as opposed to those that have to really put an effort into it. So I appreciate all that you're doing, and keep her going.
Appreciate you, Dave. You're awesome, man. Thank you for having me on, buddy.